So we want to have a little conversation here, unpack some of that, and then kick it out to the audience here, because we have more than 40 college campuses here from around the country who are here at the Institute of Politics for a conference on civic engagement. And you'll be joining us, which we look forward to. So we really want to get to student questions and student conversation, but let's engage in a little dialogue first. And Mayor Tubbs, let me begin with you. Congratulations on the new Frontier Award. No pressure, but as I look at that list, we have 3 presidential candidates: Senator Cory Booker, Mayor Pete, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Stacey Abrams, who delivered that. But your life has been committed, as you said, from that phone call that you received when you're at the White House interning, your journey. Speak to us about your commitment to public service. You had options, and going back to your community was one of them. And I know we're both fans of Hamilton, and you wanted to be in the room.
Got to be in the room.
So speak to us about that motivation.
Yeah. Well, first, let me say I'm happy. It's like the first panel ever I've been on where I feel like the old person. So thank you guys. Thank you guys. I feel like
How do you think I feel?
I feel like, but I never feel this. I'm always like the youth voice. So I feel like an elder statesman. So this is awesome.
Happy to help.
To answer your question, I think part of it comes from faith. Growing up, everyone thought I was going to be a pastor when I grew up. So just growing up in the church and hearing scriptures like the righteous care about justice for the poor. Or when I was hungry, did you feed me? If I was naked, did you clothe me? As you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. I take that very literally. So I'm like, all right, what am I doing to help Jesus? Like, I don't want Jesus mad at me, you know? So that's part of it. And I think number 2, I realized, particularly when I got to college, that for some people, public service can be something they choose to do. But I thought for myself, coming from poverty to a place like Stanford and all that privilege, and I realized that as it stands right now, most people from my neighborhood would never have that opportunity. So I felt that it was really almost an act of survival in terms of like, I have to serve because it's not just me, it's my family, it's my friends, it's my neighborhood that are literally every day fighting to have some semblance of normalcy. But still in college, there were temptations, right? I saw how big the world was. I interned at Google and loved it, the free food and free laundry, and I was like, I could do this. It's not evil either. I'm like, it's still gonna do good. Right. So I thought Google would be an option. Spent some time doing management consulting. I love flying and traveling and talking to leaders about like how to make things better without actually having to do it. So I was like, that could be a good, no offense to any consultants out there, it's important work. But then I think it was actually the murder of my cousin that really put everything in perspective. And it was really a question of, again, were all the privileges I had to cure, were they just for me? Like, was the fact that I was at Stanford, at the White House, was that just for Michael Tubbs to be individually successful, or was there a deeper purpose? And looking backwards now, the answer is a very clear yes, but back then it was a bit of a risk. People thought I was crazy. My mom was upset. She was like, no, the master plan was for you to leave and never come back and make money for us. Like, what are you? You're coming back and you don't have a job and you're going to run for city council? Like, what are you doing? But again, I think it's really just also realizing that a lot of the things I've been able to enjoy were because people were selfless and thought about people other than themselves when they made choices. When I talk about the Freedom Riders and other folks like that, they had a lot of options at their disposal as well, but they saw me or they saw people like me and they said, you know what, it's worth it for me to sacrifice a little bit for the future. So it's just my way of paying it forward.
But you were told you're too young, this isn't your time, this is about economic time, right? So what would you say to students here about particularly elective office?
Yeah,
I mean, you were the first city council race, you were...
Yeah, well, I think, the timing will never be right. There will never be a time when you do something bold and audacious or you take a risk where everyone says do it. In fact, if everyone tells you to do it, it's probably the wrong thing, honestly. Number one, and then number 2, I think it's about just a sense of urgency, right? So for me, it wasn't about winning or losing, it was about really a need. It was like this community's facing bankruptcy. At that time, we had more murders per capita than Afghanistan and Chicago, and I just felt that it's one thing to talk about the problem, but I was like, I want to be in the room. Like, I don't want to just sit here and tweet about it. I want to figure out like what is it possible to change, and if these people who are doing it are no different than me, why not me?
I love it. Edna, let me bring you into this in terms of following on the mayor's reflections. You've been an important presence with March for Our Lives, coming to this from Los Angeles. and all the social justice work that you've done there. How do you view this part of your work for public purpose and public service? There's elected office, as the mayor has, but what you've done and committed yourself to public purpose. And what would you say to students here, how they might engage in issues as you have?
I mean, I started when I was 15, and I was just like a little lost ghost, where I was just like, oh my God, what am I doing? But again, it goes back to how it was just that one moment that you had to, like, where it takes you back and you reflect and you're just like, oh no, something gotta be done, and it's gonna get done, period. And that moment for me, it wasn't my brother's death 12 years ago. It wasn't my friend's death like 3 years ago. It was my father's deportation. And so that moment where it was like, I was stuck in a moment where it's like I could either lose myself or I could prepare myself to change the world. And so that was a moment where And so that was a moment where I said, okay, what do I have to do? Because I'm tired. I am tired of having to lose family, having to lose brothers and sisters, having to lose my friends. Why is it that the kids that I grew up with playing basketball down the street and now they're gone? Why is that? Why is it such a normal thing? Why has it been normalized? Why is that? Ask yourselves that question. Why is it that black and brown students sometimes don't even go to college or don't even end up going to high school? Why is it that students don't feel safe going to and from school? Why is that? Why is it that we can't even go around the corner just to buy some Skittles? Why is it that when we yell, don't shoot, they don't listen? Ask yourselves that question. Because when I asked myself that question, I didn't come with an answer. And when I did, it was when I looked into my mother's eyes and I said, Mama, why do they hate us? Why do they hate our pigment? Why do they hate our other language? ¿Por qué nos odia? Why? And from that day, I remember my father telling me, you know what, mija? You better change this world. And when you do, I'm gonna be right next to you. And so to the day that I have my father here with me, and until every other family has that family member that has been taken away or that is incarcerated due to a corrupt system, that's the day that I could be at peace. And that's the motivation that youth and anybody in this room, they could use. You got that motivation. You got that inspiration. You got that power. You got that voice. And nobody could take that. So remember that. Hold on to your power, because we got nothing to lose but our chains.
Thank you for sharing that. Ryan, let me bring you into this. I suspect most of us met you at a CNN town hall meeting. When you asked Senator Rubio a very probing question, why do we have to march on Washington to save innocent lives, right? How would you answer that question after your journey now of a year? How do you reflect on that question that you powerfully posed to the senator a year ago?
Well, that didn't expect it to be that loud. So as I reflect back on that moment and that question, I first remember everything around it, everything surrounding that specific moment. I remember, like, right before walking out there, the CNN town hall had been something that, it was exactly a week after everything that had occurred at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And in that room, as we were setting up, as they were making sure everybody knew where they had to be, and making sure that the representatives showed up, and making sure that all the people on stage were present, I was speaking with parents of victims, of parents of people who are still in intensive care, and meeting with all of the friends and family of people who were deeply and directly affected by this tragedy. And I just knew that I had a moment, I had the time, and I had to use it as well as I could. And in asking Senator Rubio, why is it us that have to march when he is a civil servant, when he is somebody who should be doing this work for us without us having to rally in the streets? After everything that we've done, after the march, after the tours across the country, meeting with people far and wide, I realized that is truly one of the only ways we're ever going to get change. And that marching or protesting is something that it will be a constant in our society, because we will always have to fight for change, and we will always have to fight for equality and justice, because the moment that we turn a blind eye, injustice wins. And we just need to make sure as a people that we are organizing, that we are coming together, that we don't allow things like partisanship to get in the way. Because when it comes to an issue like gun violence, one thing that I think has made this movement very successful is not allowing it to be bogged down in politics. Because in previous shootings, a lot of the time the media narrative is always what dominated, and a media narrative is only as long as the media's attention, which any one of us can identify as no more than a few days, maybe a few weeks. But the issue of gun violence is a constant in American society. And it shouldn't be. We know it shouldn't be. Nobody in this country truly agrees that they want gun violence, but what we need to do is actually stand up against it. Because the Marco Rubios of the world have been bought and paid for. They have been bribed by organizations like the National Rifle Association to speak and say on their behalf what they want, not what the American people want. And all it brings me back to, just remembering that moment, I will bring a moment of levity to the room, because that's just the type of person I am. Senator Rubio, in between the commercial breaks of that broadcast, was the only person on that stage applying makeup. He had 3 people pancaking all over his face. And I walked up to him during the commercial break to show my appreciation for the fact that he showed up, because our governor refused. The president was invited and refused. And I was just so honored that he was able to show up. And then the next morning, I had thought back at that thought to realize that why should I be honored that he did his job? Why should I be honored that this guy showed up to a meeting of his own constituents? So, just as a final note to all of this, it's just, you got to stay angry at the right things. You got to make sure that you aren't just directing hatred and anger towards the Marco Rubios or the Steve Kings or the Matt Getz of the world. What you need to do is be attacking the sources of evil, not the forces perpetrating that evil. Because the moment that you allow yourself to be distracted by just another piece of the puzzle, you're never going to solve it.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, you spoke beautifully here today, and we're sadly coming up to mark February 14th, where your high school 17 of your fellow students and staff members were taken. Speak to us about this past year and the role and how you see this. You spoke of intersectionality. I've read some of your other comments. And how do you see activism in this space now as a student and speaking to the students here?
Definitely. This has been, I always say it's been the longest, shortest year of my life. And I guess like of my life is relative because I'm only 18, so I really haven't had much life. Activism is definitely not what I thought it was now that I'm in it. But as I'm sitting here almost a year later, I'm realizing that I've been an activist my entire life. I would say that as a black girl, I was born an activist. And I'll reflect on one experience. My first ever, I guess, job as an activist, I spoke on a panel, my first ever thing that I did that related to everything that happened. And the first remark I got when Q&A opened up was, "Oh, I didn't know that black students were at Stoneman Douglas." And I was like, huh. Because that had never occurred to me, you know, all that happened was so fresh in my mind. I wasn't really thinking about anything in that way. I was thinking about mass shootings. I wasn't thinking about the fact that, like, black people experience all of this on a daily basis. And so when I had time to reflect on that, I realized that I didn't just start talking about shootings. I was just talking a month before that with all of my friends, and we were crafting an op-ed hoping that it would get published in the school newspaper about the Black Lives Matter movement and how important that is. And people at my school, like a lot of people, just were so misguided in what Black Lives Matter even meant. I remember sitting in my AP classes as the only black girl, wondering why that is, encouraging my friends to take AP classes because it's not as hard as they tell you that it is, as long as you put the work in. Standing up for Trayvon Martin and getting angry on Twitter and posting Twitter rants about the fact that some people were just so ignorant to the movement and to the experience that black people have to go through on a daily basis in their communities. And I decided after that first panel that I had to be both. I had to be someone who is from Parkland because I just am, and I have to be black because I just am. And there's an intersection there. You know, mass shootings and everyday shootings don't happen in the same way, but they end in the same result. And I am part of that intersection of having to deal with such a large-scale tragedy and having my brothers and sisters fall victim to that tragedy every single day. And since then, I've been advocating not only, you know, with David and Ryan and all of my peers at Douglas, but also connecting with communities like Liberty City down in Miami, who lost 8 lives just a few weeks after what happened at our school, and got maybe a day of media coverage, had an entire walkout, and they were only covered from an aerial view, and no students got to speak, no students got to be shown on the news. And just bringing all of that together and making sure that, you know, I don't want a platform just because I'm from Stoneman Douglas. I want a platform because I'm intelligent and I can speak well and I can get my ideas across and I have ideas. And there are people who are down in black communities and in brown communities and in these inner cities who have that same voice and that same drive and just don't get the coverage. So if I could split 70% of all of the opportunities that I get and just 100% and just give it all to them, that's what I'm going to do, because that's important, and that's what activism is. I don't have to be the speaker. You know, I can be, I opt to be because I enjoy it. As you can see, I talk a lot. But what I want to do is make sure that, you know, I'm sitting in this place of privilege, but I'm not just gonna sit in it. I'm gonna get up and let somebody else sit in it. And I just think that is so important for everyone to pull away from, as I was saying, you know, wake up every day and think about your privilege and think about how you can share that with somebody else. And so that's kind of how I think about activism after a year.
Awesome. We're going to be going out. That was great. So we want to go out to questions, but David, let me ask you a final question. After this extraordinary year that you've had, are you more hopeful today about progress and change that you've seen?
I am more hopeful every day than the day before about this change, because every day, because I was out here for this award, I was able to go and speak at a college. And as a result of speaking at those colleges, I was also able to go and speak at different high schools, you know, at Newton High School and other high schools around the community. You know, and I know that even if the generation that's currently in power doesn't care about this issue, it's fine, because our generation will change it. Our generation will run for local office and actually get representation in Congress. When we talk about that concrete that people have to go through when they're coming up, it builds up over every generation. And that concrete is in the form of corporate greed and money in politics. It's in the form of racial oppression, sexism, and ageism in America that is constantly put on the backs of our young people across the country. Because sadly, one of the most horrifying things that I've realized after going across the country is that no matter where we come from as young people, we face a massive amount of oppression economically. You know, I've been to schools before where 20% of the student population lives in their car because they can't afford to live anywhere around the campus. I see myself how your zip code determines your media coverage and how much Congress cares about the violence and suffering you face. I've seen when I go out and work with Alex King who works on the west side of Chicago and has been working there for the past decade to help treat gun violence trauma in students that experience gun violence on their way to school, because we realize that most gun violence happens outside of schools. Making our schools safer is not going to end gun violence. We had this safety commission about Marjorie Stoneman Douglas for school safety. Where's the community safety commission? Right? My question is, it's not just that we have to break through that concrete, because breaking through that concrete only means one individual makes it. Our generation has to be the one to take a jackhammer to that concrete and break it up, and make sure that everybody, no matter which zip code that concrete is over, has equal opportunity. So that when my friends walk out on the south and west side of Chicago, like Alex King, Ariana Williams, and so many others, walk out against any form of gun violence, even like they did on March 14th of 2018, the way they got treated was completely different from the north side. The way the north side got treated was, oh, this is so great. Our kids are practicing their First Amendment rights. Go ahead and protest gun violence, right? Like, this has never happened before. Even though the south and west side of Chicago have been walking out of their schools for centuries against the same issue in the same nonviolent manner. On the same day that they walked out, the north side gets reporters on the ground. They get reporters asking kids, why are you walking out? Why are you standing up and all of a sudden doing something, right? But when it's the south side, you know how Alex King got treated? He got threatened with suspension and expulsion with police officers outside of his school, ready to arrest him and throw him into the school-to-prison pipeline. You know how they got covered? It wasn't with reporters on the ground. It was covered from a helicopter that made it look like a violent protest. What our generation has to realize is the massive amount of oppression we face in every defining characteristic that the oppressors want us to be in, where it's, oh, you're too young to know what you're talking about. Because of the color of your skin, you can't talk about any other issues that other people within your generation face. Because you're a woman, you can't talk about men's issues. Because you're a man, you can't talk about women's issues, right? We have to break down those barriers. We have to break down all the demographic divides that we face across America while still acknowledging them, but realizing that oftentimes those divisions are put there in place by the people in power that want us to be divided. Because they know that right now the young people are the largest voting bloc in the United States of America. They know that if we can unite, if the youth can unite, and not just like in RFK's Ripple of Hope speech, probably my favorite speech of all time, highly recommended. Yes, it's awesome. He talks about how being young isn't just about your age. It's about challenging the new norm and fighting for what's idealistic to change what's realistic. Because we realize that the only thing that has ever changed what is realistic is a small group of determined individuals fighting for the idealistic ideas that we all should be fighting for in the first place, but the oppressors don't want us fighting for or learning about. There's a reason why we don't learn about gun violence in America in our history. There's a reason why when we start talking about mass shootings and gun violence and everyday shootings and suicide, we consider those all different things, and they're not. They all revolve around the same thing, and that's people having access to guns that shouldn't have access in the first place, no matter the community, right? Because I don't think if you're a domestic abuser that you should ever be able to get a gun in the United States of America. And we have to realize that the jackhammer of this generation to that concrete that has been laid, that is bigger than this building on top of the backs of our generation in every zip code, even though it may be different widths, depending on your zip code, it doesn't matter if we have a jackhammer. And that jackhammer is voting, and not just voting for Democrats or Republicans, but by voting against the source of evil. Because evil will always be there if we only attack the people that are in power. That's what they want us to do, because all warfare is based on deception. They want us to believe that if we take down our president and get him voted out of office, that oppression goes away, when in reality, we need to stop the very thing that created Donald Trump in the first place, and that's a lack of education. We need to realize that we have to fight for those that are no longer here, like Zaire Kelly, who was killed in Washington, D.C. in September of 2017. Zaire is a twin. His brother Zion was able to speak at the March for Our Lives about gun violence in Washington, D.C. But we have to realize that the way that Zaire Kelly's death was predicated was when he was walking home from a college prep class to better his future and to get a better future so he could go to college with his brother. He was shot and killed several feet from his household. And you know how his death got covered in the news? As gang violence, even though he never was affiliated with a gang in the first place. The people that we fight for are like Joaquin Oliver, who died at my school. One of the last things Joaquin did was give his girlfriend, Tori, flowers that he had bought for her the night before with his father. Tori and Joaquin did not know that that was going to be the last time they were ever going to be able to see each other. They didn't know that was the last time that as young people that love each other, that were best friends, that was going to be the last time they would ever be able to see each other or hug each other ever again, or say, I love you ever again. And that's why we continue to say never again, because even though Joaquin may have died that day, his ripple of hope in the stone's throw that is a lifetime on the ocean of time in our generation, even though at the end of the day we all sink to the bottom, because life is not infinite, hope is. And that ripple of hope lives on in each and every one of us within this movement. Because even though that ripple may be able to die out, if we don't keep pushing it, as young people, we can continue to push it, and we can turn that ripple into a wave. We can turn that wave into a tsunami that changes the shoreline of this issue in America so that no child has to live in fear of gun violence, whether that be inside or outside of their schools, no matter their zip code, their sexual orientation, or what they look like, because in America, we should care about you because you are one thing, and that is human being.
That's awesome. Thank you. That was awesome. So, we have an extraordinary group here. We have students from around the country. There are microphones here, and we invite your questions to anyone here on the panel. And someone is going to share the mic. Right here.
This is for anyone who would care to speak about it. How do you feel about lowering the voting age to 16?
Okay, so I want everybody on this panel to talk about it, but first of all, I want to acknowledge the fact that y'all are from March for Our Lives Boston, and thank you, Felix, you're awesome. Thanks for doing that 50-mile march with us. Felix and Jack and Vickiana, I don't know where she is in the room, she's right there. We marched 50 miles from Worcester, Massachusetts to Springfield, Massachusetts, where the AR-15 was manufactured. That killed 17 people and shot 17 others that survived at my school. We marched 50 miles and used local community organizers to build an active protest against the gun manufacturers that benefit off of mass shootings in America. Because we know that gun sales go up by triple digits after mass shootings because of the fear-mongering that the NRA is able to constantly push. thank you guys for doing that in the first place, seriously. But don't worry, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to sidestep that question. Yes, we should lower the voting age to 16 for every election, because when previous generations say that we're too young to know what we're talking about, that is not, especially after saying that everybody needs to go out and vote, and saying that kids are too lazy to be civically active. And then once we become civically active, it's, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, they're young, they don't understand. In reality, when people say that, being civically active and getting opposition is not an excuse for us not to be civically active anymore. That is an excuse for the very people that are in power to fund our civics education in the first place.
Others on the panel, I mean, my understanding of the 16-year-old is it's at local elections, I think.
Yeah, it is at local elections, but either way, I support it.
Mayor, do you have a take on this? Should 16-year-olds be allowed to, vote in local elections?
Absolutely.
That's all.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a given to me. Everybody's always like, oh, you don't know enough. Like, that seems like an easy fix too. Teach me more. I don't see what the problem is. I feel like at 16, of course, I was a little childish, a little naive, but there are 50-year-olds who are childish and naive.
Noted. Noted. Point taken. We have another microphone someone's going to show me. Right here. Please tell us where you're from.
My name is Devin Woodson. I'm from Louisiana State University.
Welcome.
First of all, congratulations, and thank you all for coming out here.
Thank you.
How and what would you suggest we all go back and show our peers who haven't registered to vote or who don't understand what the new frontier is, that we can show them that our positive visions for the future do not reflect the negative versions of our reality, and we can also get them one day to be here to listening to inspiring speakers like you all. Thank you.
Great. Edna, do you want to lead us on?
Yeah. So what I always say is have an open mind, open heart. And if you're here, sitting here today in this room or any other room where somebody's sharing their story, you better share it with others too, because that's the only way we're going to create progress, all right? And so share our story. Listen to understand, don't listen to respond back with some negative stuff, all right? And so if they're not here, then you share our story. Be like, I know it's hard. I know it's hard. I'm from South Central, near Compton, and it's really hard because me personally, I used to have this mindset where it's just like, okay, well, nobody's gonna listen, this and that, X, Y, and Z, right? And then I would be like, okay, well, and then I was also aware that activism was always in South Central. It was always there, and it was always in communities of color. And me seeing that there wasn't like really such a huge like media impact or whatever, just made me think that, okay, maybe like it's not that important. But then when I started doing it, there's a whole thing behind the scenes. And so as people continue to see their homeboys or homegirls doing what they gotta do, then that's when they're gonna be like, wait, hold up. She's doing it, they're doing it, why can't I do it? You gotta inspire them by being yourself and by bringing the work back to them. And that's how progress will continue. So make sure you bring that work, our stories, and our work back to them. So next time that we come here again, they're gonna be here with you.
Mayor? Well done.
I just want to jump in briefly on the voting point, because I think oftentimes, like, voting is necessary but not sufficient to really bring about change. So I think it's a couple of things. I think it's vote and, so in Stockton I always say vote and then hold me accountable. Vote and organize. But then number two, I think it's also giving people something to vote for. So vote and create the candidates in which you're voting for. Because I think oftentimes when folks are given choices that don't speak to them, don't speak to their issues, it's hard to motivate them to get out to vote. But if we gave people inspiring candidates like you, I'm sure, like the young people on this stage, and I think we'll see we won't have to convince people to register to vote, because I can vote for you and you get me, you're from my community, you want to do these three things. So I always caution people that the vote, it's not a magic bullet, but it's a tool, it's an important tool. but it's a tool amongst many others. And then the other thing I would say is that as much as it's important to share the stories you hear today, I think particularly for your local context, it's a story in your community that only you and your friends can tell, that it will be that much more resonant and powerful for the folks in your community. So if anything, I would take the example particularly from the Parkland students and the March for Our Lives students and really go back and figure out what's the story of your community, because as I said, the issues they're fighting for aren't particular to them, that they're in almost every single community in our country. So I would take their example to be strong and courageous and believe in your voice, but also think about what's the story of your community, and you and your friends are the best storytellers of that.
Great, thank you. Question, another question. Go right over here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Howell, and I'm a sophomore political science major, philosophy minor at Howard University. So as we know, historically black colleges and, black colleges and universities play a major role in society and our economy. Howard University produces the most black attorneys, Xavier University of Louisiana produces the most black pharmacists, and North Carolina A&T produces the most black engineers. So with that being said, in a time where Bennett College had to fight to maintain their accreditation, what role do HBCUs play in this new frontier? And also, how can we as student leaders and as student activists hold our administrations accountable to preserve the legacy of our institutions? Thank you.
Great question.
Wow.
Big question. Well, I think, please.
Oh, okay. First of all, wow. Yeah, wow. I would say that as a student and as a young person, you know already intrinsically that you have that voice. So what you're trying to do is convince everyone who claims to be above you that not only you have that voice, but they have to listen to you. As far as how you do that, at this point, I'm not sure I 100% know, but I do know that there are some things that I do to kind of maneuver that rhetoric that I'm too young, or I don't have enough wisdom for this yet, or maybe I should wait a few, decades before I start fighting for other people's lives, which just sounds counterproductive to me. But just knowing and standing in that, going to an HBCU, being an educated black person, to be able to say, I matter. There's no way that coming from the history of Martin Luther King and coming from the history of Malcolm X and Rosa Parks and Angela Davis, that I don't matter right now. And so taking that and reminding your administration of that is important, knowing even just amongst you and your friend group, remembering your history and being able to take your history and use it to motivate yourself to become something greater and to stand up for yourself. Of course, it's awful that Bennett College would have to go through that. And as historically black colleges and universities are so important, it saddened me when I heard that, because I looked up to people who graduated from historically black colleges and universities. They were my idols and are still my mentors. And understanding that history and why it's so important, and taking it to not only black people. There are times when I talk to my friends who are non-black, and when I say HBCU, they're like, what is that? And then I have to go through the whole process of being like, well, it's a historically black college or university created because, which is also, well, it's something that aggravates me, but regardless, it's something that makes me realize that our job is not done. The job is not to just go to college and get a degree and get a job. Your purpose is to, yes, go to college and get that degree, but it's to spread your knowledge of not only what you learn there in your textbooks, but what you learn there amongst culture and amongst the people that look like you, but are from different places and from all across the country, and then going and expanding that to not only people who look just like you. and changing that narrative for the entire world, for the country first, but then for the entire world, is what's going to be the most important aspect of making sure that things like what happened to Bennett College do not happen to HBCUs around the country.
So I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll have a reception. I'm sure our recipients will have time, but if we have one more question.
It's right there, behind you.
Right there.
I'm actually asking a question.
Oh, you were looking like you were looking for the question.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
So I'm Kat, I go to school here. So I'm really glad that you guys are here today, and it's been very inspiring. I think we can all agree hearing you speak, and really looking forward to the next steps that you all are taking. When Brian Stevenson came and gave a talk, he actually spoke to the next members of Congress. And one of the main points that he said is that in order to be a leader, you have to be proximate to the issues that really matter. And what happens when you move into positions of power is you move further and further back from the actual work. And I'm curious, you guys are building, you're constructing this movement, Mayor Stubbs is, rising up. And how do you have a plan, or how do you have that structure so that you can keep the leaders that you inspire and then the leaders that you're going to be in those positions of proximity?
Well, I think with that, what we really try to do is to make sure that we do not, because with March for Our Lives, we have grown to the point where we now have chapters all across the nation and all across this planet, where, as we mentioned earlier with March for Our Lives Boston, like there are a lot of groups organizing alongside us, but we are not there all the time on the ground. But one thing that we make sure to do is to never forget what we do and how we really try to put our passion into it. I can tell you that during the election, we had a program going on called Turnout Tuesdays, where every Tuesday we would have a different action, a different activity for members of our chapters and people who follow us on socials to register people to vote, to make sure they're informing their friends and family, and various different, wear our merchandise that has a voter registration QR code on it, and various things like that. And for those days, we made sure that people in our home base in Parkland were still doing those things alongside them. When we were checking to see if our neighborhoods were registered to vote, I made sure to knock on several hundred doors in my own neighborhood, in my own community, and it was to make sure that we do not remove ourselves from that, because that is a great point. That when somebody, say, with this previous presidency, a lot of people look towards the president to solve all their problems, but you can't look towards the top to solve things that are happening at the bottom. What you got to do is work from every single angle. You can't just be looking up and praying that one force is going to solve it, whether it's God or the president. What you got to do is put your hands into the dirt and actually start working. Because no matter how big a problem may seem, it is solvable in some way or shape or form. And when it comes to something like gun violence, what we make sure to do is that when we speak out on things, like when we're going out here, going on a panel, as David said, he went and met with several colleges and several high schools before this. This is something that we make sure to always do whenever we go on a trip, because it's something that we find the most important, to speak to the younger people, to make sure that we're actually reaching out to them, because that's what this is all about. That's what this movement has been all about, making sure that this next generation is ready to take up those reins of leadership. With our chapter organizations, we've made sure to appoint people to lead certain regions and to make sure that they are training people beneath them to take their place when they're gone. Because eventually, we got to go to college. Eventually, we got to go to grad school. Eventually, we got to get jobs. Eventually, we have to live our own lives. And whether we dedicate ourselves to the job or not, we still have to have our own personalities and our own existences. So to make sure that we are doing that, we have to be training people. We have to be making sure that we're passing the baton when we can. I can tell you on a personal note, me and David's sisters are both in the March for Our Lives Parkland chapter, and they're doing excellent work down there, organizing. They secured a space in City Hall. They made sure that they can have meetings all the time, and they are sophomores in high school right now. So for sure, in our community, we have another 2 years of leadership, even if we left tomorrow. And it's just, that's something that we try to make sure of all the time, that we aren't forgetting about that we aren't getting caught up in one particular aspect of this issue. Because a lot of the time, whenever we're, say, on a panel or in interviews or just speaking in small groups, it kind of gets narrowed down to where you're only talking about 3D printed weapons, or you're only talking about assault weapons, or you're only talking about extreme risk protection orders, or just one facet of this issue. And what we try to make sure is always to take that step back and actually realize what we're trying to do. And whenever somebody tries to, like, I'll go off on a tangent here a little bit, whenever a counter-protester, a neo-Nazi, a real bad person tries to come at us at our events with these assault weapons, with these things meant to scare us, we take that step back and we speak to them and we're like, we're not here trying to take that away from you. We're trying to make sure that everybody here can stay safe and can play and live their lives. Like the fact that when our national tour started, we started in Chicago and joined St. Sabina's Church in their Peace March. That march happens every Friday during the summer because in Chicago, they have some of the worst violent death rates during the summer because all the kids are out of school and it's hotter in the city and people are outside and roaming around, and they never got the attention they deserved until we showed up there. And that's a travesty in itself, but it's also the fact that we sat through part of the demonstration that evening. They said several hundred names of people who were under the age of 21 who had been killed. So when we are speaking to those counter-protesters, by the way, that took about 11 minutes. It was 11 minutes of just naming people who were murdered under the age of 21. They didn't have a chance. They didn't have their fair shot. They were shot. And what we have to realize, especially one thing that I want to make sure is mentioned, the fact that this is the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, JFK was assassinated. His brother was assassinated. The Kennedy family has faced way too many instances of gun violence alone for this to still be a problem. But here we are today. So what we have to do is make sure that there are leaders out there speaking out for this issue. Make sure that we don't forget why we fight, and we tell those people who say, why do you want to take this away from me? It's not about that. This is a human issue. This is a public health issue. 40,000 plus people die every year. We can't allow that to happen. No country on earth should allow 40,000 people to die every year and say, well, I guess our hands are tied. You can't do that in a civil society. That is devaluing life. We have to add empathy back into our society. We have to reimagine what our community can look like when we actually care about one another. Because right now you can see whenever an issue of gun violence occurs, whenever these matters just happen, it's over and done with in the news. You'll forget about the next story, same as you hear the next one. It's a matter of just taking that step back, remembering that we can all be affected by this, and that we all have to fight now. Because now is as best a shot as any as we're going to get. So just...
Thank you. Yeah. That was awesome. Well done. Well, Ryan, you've given us the perfect framing close, and you've all given us the perfect start to this weekend's conference with all the campuses from around the country here, the Institute of Politics for our conference on political and civic engagement. We thank you. We congratulate all of you on this prestigious award. We thank in a special way Ambassador Kennedy and Jack Schlossberg for being here. This has been an inspiring conversation. You have already led lives of consequence. We are inspired by it, and we're grateful for your engagement in this conversation today.